Hi, Tony Lane from Vincents Chartered Accountants, and thanks for spending some time with us today talking about the future of work.
You're welcome.
Can you tell us a little bit about Vincents and what's your view on the future of work?
Vincents is a multidisciplinary chartered accounting firm. We have 7 offices based around Australia, mostly down the eastern seaboard, shortly expanding into Adelaide. And we're a full service firm, so we cover a range of accounting disciplines from traditional tax and business services work through audit to some specialist areas that not all accountants cover, which are forensic accounting, forensic technology and insolvency, which is my practice.
So you've had a chat to us previously about some of the ideas around future of work, entrepreneurship and business, and you're going to be speaking at the Festival of Ambitious Ideas on the 30th of July.
Yeah.
Can you give us some ideas in terms of the trends and drivers of change that you see influencing a lot of the businesses you deal with?
I think it's fair to say that there are 2 categories of business. There are those who are looking to embrace changes in their environment to work smarter rather than harder, and there are those who are quite traditional, either through choice or through inaction, and that means that they're probably not capitalising on the opportunities that are available to them as well as they could, or at all. And the ones that come through my door seeking our assistance from an insolvency perspective are often the ones in that latter category, where they're finding that the industry around them isn't the industry that they entered 15, 20 years ago, and things have moved on. And their failure to keep pace with the changes in their industry has been one of the major drivers of their ultimate failure.
With some of the trends like globalisation, and especially facing businesses here in the ACT, where we have one sort of major employer and a much smaller private sector, how do you think globalisation is facing our local businesses?
Look, speaking from a services industry, I think there's quite a pervasive effect of globalisation, and people think about that as multinationals and the ability of our economy to interact with the rest of the world in an uninhibited way. I think about it in far more micro terms than that. For instance, I've come across a plumber recently who's having his bookkeeping done in Sri Lanka because that is more economical for him. He's using a software product that enables him and his bookkeeper to do things in real time so that they can see what each other are doing to his accounting records. And that for him means a cost saving, because obviously the cost of delivery of that service in Sri Lanka is cheaper than it is here, and that's just simply a fact. That's not an exploitation exercise, at least not in my view. That's just an economic fact. And we're going to be seeing far more of that, which presents challenges and opportunities for people in our type of industry and services. Traditionally, I think it's been the case that chartered accounting firms and to a large extent law firms and those anachronistic stuffed shirt style service entities are very, very slow to embrace change. I've come from and worked up through an environment which has been at the cutting edge of technological change, and that's enabled us to capitalise on opportunities both within Australia and outside. Not only in terms of servicing our own business needs, but also providing opportunities for doing different styles of work.
Do you think with services firms, things like some of the technology changes are changing fundamentally the way a practice is set up and practice works?
No doubt. I think what you're finding now is that there's such a rapid advancement in not only software but hardware delivery systems which enable the delivery. Looking at a law firm, for instance, I've spent time recently in the family court on a couple of matters, and the Deputy Chief Justice's courtroom is completely wired for technology. There's document readers, there's cameras, TVs, ports where you can plug your laptop in and deal with documents electronically. Now, traditionally, we've become accustomed to seeing lawyers and barristers with their massive trolleys of documents, trekking backwards and forwards between the courts. What's happening now is the courts are moving towards a more e-lodgement system. There's a much greater ability to deal with documents electronically. the impediment to the success of that is the willingness to embrace that from the people who control that process. So that's us as accountants, that's lawyers, that's judges, that's a range of people in the process. What I see happening though is that the use of particularly greater emphasis on electronic media to speed up that process will expedite the consideration of matters. It will enable people to work more remotely rather than having to coagulate around population centres, and to deal with their chosen service provider wherever they might be. So for instance, I have a range of people that I deal with in the work that I do, but they're not all located here in Canberra. They're located around the country in different places, and in fact Vincents' head office is in Brisbane. So when we gather together for directors' meetings as a group of partners of the firm, that's all done using technology and cameras and TV screens and those sorts of things. It's not perfect, and I don't think perfection is the goal. I think efficiency is the goal, and that drives lower costs and it drives more profitable outcomes, which means that we can invest in doing other things better, which hopefully provides a better service to our clients.
We've seen, just touching on what you've talked to about office locations and that type of thing, we've seen a number of co-working spaces start in Canberra, and we're also seeing a real push to teleworking. Do you think the services sector is embracing this, or are they resistant to take on some of these trends in terms of location, where you work, and working any time as well?
Look, I think there are some structural impediments to that, particularly within services firms that have a hierarchical organisation structure, particularly where the individuals responsible ultimately for the work are the senior staff, and the people who are doing most of the work are further down the tree. So that creates an issue of supervision and trust and making sure that the work is done in a timely and a cost-effective way. Now, I don't see that necessarily as an impediment. I see that as a challenge to be thought through and worked around. But ultimately, I think if you're going to be employing people in that industry, whether it's legal, accounting, engineering, medical, whatever it might be, there needs to be a level of trust. And in my experience, the employees who respond best to that are the ones who are trusted and who understand that it's a give-give scenario, and if they're going to be provided with that level of flexibility to work from home for a period of time, then there are other things that we might require as part of that. But I certainly see the use of teleworking, particularly in services industries, as a far more beneficial way to integrate people into the workforce, and particularly mothers returning from maternity leave, or anybody caring for small children, people who are looking to try and, diversify their work hours to suit their lifestyle, which is becoming more and more a thing these days, work-life balance. People are prioritising lifestyle issues often above their income. And so that enables smarter firms to look at opportunities to retain good and valuable staff whilst still maintaining the level of productivity and service delivery. I think the model around 9 to 5 client service delivery is, if not dead, then it's in palliative care. I mean, it is so old school now. And it's simply because the people who need our services aren't available from 9 to 5. I mean, we try and schedule a meeting with a client who's involved in building and construction. Well, they're working from 7 till 3 or 4. So they've got a 1 or 2 hour window at the end of the day to come and meet with someone like me. So I think that as the nature of work elsewhere changes, so must we change. And that's happening. It's happening fragmentally, incrementally. There are those who are moving with it. The larger organisations, I think, have bigger structural issues to overcome. I think the smaller, more nimble, more dynamic organisations with free-thinking leaders are the ones who are most apt at addressing the challenges presented by the different ways in which we can work now.
Another area of potential change, or possibly an area needing change, is the whole idea of how do service firms bill for their work. It's always been around time for things. Do you think this is going to change? Do you think people are pushing to pay for outputs or outcomes rather than actual time spent? And how will this affect service firms?
Yeah, look, it's a very hot topic, as you say. So much so that even the federal court recently, in a couple of judgments, and also the New South Wales Supreme Court, have been quite critical of people in our industry and the way in which we charge for the work that we do. Look, we are, as a firm and my practice, quite open to sitting down and discussing with people the way in which we charge for our work. We are flexible. We're not necessarily welded to a timesheet, and in fact some of the work that we're doing, which is non-formal insolvency work, we're trying to get in before we need to actually deal with something in a formal way. So we're talking about informal turnaround and workout and restructuring work, is often done on a fixed price basis or outcomes related. So if we're able to take a business, repackage it, remodel it, and then achieve a sale, then we might get paid on the outcome as a percentage of the sale price. There are some restrictions in services entities. So for example, our forensic accounting practice can't take fees on a contingency basis. It's restricted by the rules of the court and also our professional bodies. So there are some restrictions, but I think by and large there is a shift, or at least a conscious awareness of the difficulties presented by timesheet billing. One of the most obvious ones is wheel spinning, as it's called within our industry. And there are many, many firms out there who will seize an opportunity where there are dollars to be had, and through the simple mechanism of timesheet entries, you can generate a lot of fees very quickly, whilst achieving, outwardly at least, not very much. I mean, the work that we do can be quite complex at times, and sometimes the only way to properly account for the variability in that work, because it's unpredictable, is through timesheet billing. But I'm certainly quite cognizant of the fact that there are other methods whereby we can get paid, and in some instances it's becoming more the norm than not to initiate that discussion around outcomes, as you say, and what is the outcome people are looking for. Most often in the work that we see, that's simply the demise and deregistration of the company. But if it's something specific that doesn't involve a traditional insolvency appointment, then generally speaking, there's quite a bit of flexibility around how we recover a fee for that.
Do you think globalisation is actually causing quite a lot of pressure in terms of people rethinking traditional law firms, traditional accounting practices, those types of firms?
I'm sure that it is. It's a little bit difficult in my specific industry, simply because there's domestic legislation, so having a global impact on that is difficult unless you're educating yourself about the Australian jurisdiction. But certainly from a business services perspective, absolutely. Those sorts of issues are becoming more and more prevalent, and what you're finding now is amongst cost-conscious organisations, they're moving more towards an inquisitive approach to service delivery. In fact, what I'm finding, even with liquidators and administrators, people are going around town and they're paying more attention to interviewing those people before they give them the work. Now, some might say that's always been the case. They're forum shopping for the lowest possible price, but it's less price driven now and more outcomes driven. And we've been the beneficiaries of that quite recently, just simply because of the way in which we think we deliver our services in a different way.
With looking at the next 5, 10, 20 years and the next generation coming through and looking for employment, what do you think the universities and the schools should actually be focusing on or doing differently in order to prepare them for a future?
Personally, I think that the university edifice is great at teaching a technical discipline, which is fantastic. But in terms of the how, they can teach the what, that's fantastic, but the how is often the sticking point. And the founder of our firm is often famously quoted for suggesting that as soon as he hires an undergraduate or a new graduate, he has to teach them how to speak and how to write. Because often those basic communication skills aren't conveyed or aren't picked up through the universities. I've been privileged to work within one of our country's top universities over the last 6 months, delivering some coursework there at a master's level. And the one thing that stunned me, and this is simply an observation, is the lack of coherent communication skills in writing. Now these are master's level students. These people have done an undergraduate degree in law, they've been out practicing in the workplace, and yet they're coming to writing pieces of work which are ostensibly things that they should be delivering to their clients. And we as the deliverers of this course and the assessors of their work are looking at it with quite a critical gaze and saying, well, is this the sort of thing we should be expecting of people in this position? And it's quite disappointing. So I think universities really have a job to do in taking a more vocational approach to things and saying, yes, we're teaching the technical skills, but along with that needs to come an ability to be able to use them and apply them. It's all fantastic to know the periodic table off by heart if you're a chemist, but if you can't then communicate that information to a third party, then that knowledge is useless. Knowledge that's siloed or warehoused is of no use to anyone. So I think the universities have a real role to play there. Are they doing it well? Well, I think they're improving, but there's some ground to cover.
Do you think that we should be even looking at the school level and starting to teach children to think more in terms of creative thinking, problem solving, innovation, and looking at entrepreneurship as a possible career direction, given that by all sort of examples, we're looking at a future where they're probably not going to be in the same job for life, probably only for 2 or 3 years, and quite possibly they're going to have to go out and create their own work.
Quite so. It's a common observation now, and I think there was something mentioned in Parliament about it the other day in the passage of some legislation there, that people will now often have 3, 4 different careers in their lifetime, and the concept of a tenured position where you are in the one job for your entire life, I think has died a long past death. I believe that any opportunity to foster creativity should be pursued. I think sometimes, at least from my recollection and exposure to school curricula at different levels, there's often a want to try and fit people into a box and keep them within certain bounds. Is that because of the ability of the educators to manage that? I don't know, perhaps. But it certainly must be the case that if there's creativity that's being shown, try and develop that. Not give it carte blanche, free rein, so that you've got somebody off doing something completely different to everybody else at a school level. But try and coax and guide it and foster it and develop it within the framework of what's trying to be achieved overall for a class of students and generally within a curriculum. I think that's important at any level. The common story that you see is most of the entrepreneurs are the ones who dropped out of school at age whatever, or never finished uni, or started 7 degrees and didn't finish one of them. And it's always puzzled me as to why that is, and I suspect it's probably because the traditional education methods simply didn't meet the needs of that person from a creativity and entrepreneurial point of view. So you have the Zuckerbergs and the Steve Jobses of this world out there who say, you know what, park the traditional methodology of getting to a point of success in one's career. I'm going to take a different path. And I think the success multiple there is far and away higher than the success multiple of a partner of a services firm. So yeah, there's very much got to be an emphasis on that. I think it's got to be balanced though.
Mm-hmm. Do we need to start looking at fostering more relationships or partnerships or collaboration between academic institutions, whether it's really early at the school level or at the university level, between academics and the business sector?
Look, I think that's often been an uneasy fit. I know from personal experience, having had family members involved in commercialisation of technology developed at universities, it's can be at times a bit like herding cats. I think academics have their own view about the world and perhaps not quite the commercial business focus that others might. And so the interface between taking that output from the creative environment of the university to then a commercialisation phase is often a fraught one. And that can mean the life or death of a particular project. The intellectual property can be fantastic, but often it's the way in which it's pitched and marketed. And finding people who have the opportunity to seek out, or the ability to seek out opportunities for the application of that technology is often the key part which is missed. So that's a challenge. I think that's an ongoing challenge, at least in my experience. Is it something that we as a firm can benefit from? Well, absolutely. I mean, there are people coming up with new ways and new ideas of doing things all the time, and if you're open to that and if you've got your finger on the pulse, there's absolutely an opportunity to capitalise on that.
Tony, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your time this morning, and we look forward to seeing you in action at the Festival of Ambitious Ideas.
You're very welcome, Candice. Looking forward to it.